557, Western Front, July 1944. Field Marshal Walter Model studies a paper timetable inside a commandeered farmhouse. His role simple on paper and impossible in practice. Stabilize a front that is being peeled apart by machines. A rail schedule sat on the table like a promise. Clean columns, neat times, precise hand stamps. The kind of document that makes chaos look solvable. If you value this kind of forensic war analysis, subscribe now. These episodes aren't about legends. They're about procedures, bottlenecks, and the math that decides who collapses first. Model did not trust speeches. He trusted systems, signals, tonnage tables, track capacity. He trusted the idea that an army is fed and moved by rails, not by courage. In France, in 1944, that belief was both rational and lethal, because the war in the West had become a contest of throughput, not who wanted it more. Who could move more steel, more fuel, more shells per hour to the right kilometers of road? Model arrived as the Germans' fireman, a commander used when something burned. He was sent to burning fronts because he was blunt, fast, and procedural. He didn't romanticize defeat. He catalogued it. He asked for trains. The German front after the Normandy landings was a stretched membrane. It held only because the Allies were also constrained. Beaches were choked, roads were clogged. The Allied advance was real, but uneven. Every mile inland demanded fuel. Every ton of fuel demanded trucks. Every truck demanded spare parts. Even victory had a logistics tech. Model's job was to exploit that tail, slow the enemy, force them to burn fuel on detours, buy time, and time, for Germany, meant rail. On a map, German railways in France were a lattice. From the rear areas toward the front ran trunk lines, branch lines, junctions, and sidings. Each junction was a valve. Each bridge was a single point of failure. Each marshalling yard was a factory that did not produce weapons, but produced movement. Model understood that the timetable was not a suggestion. It was a physics solution. Rails did not allow improvisation the way roads did. A train could not dodge a crater. It could not overtake another train in a single-track section. It could not refuel at a whim. It had to be slotted into the network like a part in an assembly line. And in July 1944, German rail networks in France were being attacked as if they were weapons systems, because they were. The Allies did not need to defeat German divisions. They could starve them of the inputs that made divisions dangerous. The target was not always the soldier. Often it was the timetable. Model's assumptions were normal for a commander raised on continental warfare. Assumption 1. The rail net, though damaged, would remain usable with repairs. German rail troops had been rebuilding tracks under fire for years. Assumption 2. If reserves could be concentrated quickly, the front could be stitched. Reserves were more than men. They were artillery, anti-tank guns, engineered bridging gear, fuel, radio trucks, ammunition. Assumption 3. The enemy's tempo could be slowed with a timely counterstroke, not a grand offensive. A controlled punch at the right seam. But those assumptions depended on a hidden variable that did not show up on the paper. Air, not as a romantic dogfight in the clouds. Air as an invisible air as a system that turns daylight into attacks. Every rail movement in France now carried a second schedule, the one written by Allied fighter bombers. A train could be on time on the dispatch sheet and still be late in reality, because it had to hide in daylight, disperse, stop, and wait. Model had a timetable that said his critical move would arrive by mid-morning. It likely looked perfect. But rail timetables assume the track as a continuous line. In 1944, France, the track was a line that could be severed at any minute. The German staff system tried to manage this with procedure. Trains were routed at night when possible. Locomotives were blacked out. Crews were briefed on camouflage stops. Rolling stock was dispersed under. In some sectors, trains were broken into smaller segments to reduce loss when attacked. But procedure cannot replace capacity. When you break a train into smaller parts, you need more locomotives, more sidings, more coordination. You multiply the complexity, and complexity is where the hidden variable hides. Model's chosen weapon was concentration. He wanted combat power collected, aligned, and inserted. The rail schedule was the spine of that plan. One formation, a reserve unit, was supposed to be at a specific railhead by a specific hour. From that railhead, trucks would push it forward. If the formation arrived early, the trucks would idle, wasting fuel and attention. If it arrived late, the front would absorb the impact instead. The German side did not have spare fuel for idling, not anymore. By 1944, Germany's fuel situation was strategic, not local. Synthetic fuel plants were being bombed. Imports were strangled. Stocks were rationed. A division's daily movement was a calculation, not a preference. So Model's perfect schedule was also a fuel plan. Trains were efficient. Trucks were expensive. If rail delivered late, trucks had to race, detour, or run in daylight. That invited air attack and breakdowns. It turned time into loss. Somewhere between the rear and the front, the schedule began to slip. Not by a day, not by a week, by hours. And in a mechanized battle, hours are not small. A front line can hold at 6 o'clock and unravel by 9 o'clock. Not because men lose nerve, but because a system crosses a threshold. Ammunition runs low, radios go silent. A bridge is lost. A battalion runs out of anti-tank rounds. A single gap becomes a corridor. Model's plan assumed insertion at a precise window. The window was measured in daylight. But by 1944, counterattacks had a new constraint. They had to move through an environment dominated by Allied aircraft. A unit assembling in the open was a beacon. A column on a road was a target. Even a few fighter bombers could delay a regiment for hours by forcing it to scatter, so the counterattack had to be timed to limit exposure, often at night or under poor weather, or through hedgerow cover. That meant the rail timetable was not simply about arrival, it was about when the unit could safely move next. If the train arrived 3 hours late, the unit might miss its safest movement period. Then it sits, or it moves and bleeds. Either way, the front pays. The hidden variable was not one dramatic explosion. It was a chain of small mechanical frictions. A bomb crater on a line. The reroute adds distance. Added distance adds time. Added time pushes the train into daylight. Daylight triggers air threat. Air threat forces stops and dispersal. Dispersal breaks the rhythm of the timetable. Breaks require assembly. Reassembly consumes switches and sidings. Switches become saturated. Saturation produces queues. Now the rail net is no longer a net. It is a series of... This is how only a few hours happens. Model likely understood this in theory, but he was still compelled by the alternative. Without rail concentration, he had only two options: retreat slowly and bleed, or counterattack with whatever happened to be near, regardless of quality. Germany in 1944 could not afford quality distributed. It needed quality concentrated. That was the paradox. So the staff clung to the timetable. In the rear, the train existed as so many flat cars, so many box cars, so many locomotives assigned a departure slot, a priority code, a destination, a planned arrival. On the ground, the train existed as mass, hot steel wheels, brake smoke, coal dust, men sitting on equipment dozing, boots dangling, radios wrapped in tarps, gun barrels greased against rain, paper maps in sleeves, a sergeant counting heads with a pencil stub. Rail movement is calm when it works. It feels inevitable, and that feeling is deceptive. A rail network is a machine made of thousands of smaller machines. Switches, signals, junctions, bridges, maintenance depots, telegraph lines, dispatch offices, repair crews. If you remove a single gear at the wrong place, the whole device does not stop instantly. It continues briefly on momentum. Then it jams. The Allied air campaign targeted that jamming, not always by destroying tracks in the middle of nowhere. That can be repaired quickly. A smarter target is a junction, a marshalling yard, a bridge that cannot be replaced within hours, a signal station, a locomotive depot. Hit those, and you don't just stop one train. You disrupt the scheduling logic for dozens. Model was planning within a system that the enemy had learned to attack scientifically, and German recovery was limited. Repair troops could fill craters and replace rails, but they needed sleepers, ballast, spikes, tools. They needed locomotives to bring supplies forward. They needed time without repeated attack, and they needed communication lines to coordinate. By summer 1944, the German side often repaired under a timer, not a clock, a threat. The threat that aircraft would return. So repairs became rushed. Rushed repairs are fragile. Fragile repairs fail again. Now the timetable looks correct, but it is based on a false assumption that repairs restore original capacity. They rarely do. A line that once carried many trains per day might now carry a fraction. Not because it is broken, but because it is weak. Every passage risks another failure. In that environment, priority traffic fights itself. Ammunition trains demand priority. Fuel trains demand priority. Reserve units demand priority. Medical trains demand priority. Evacuation trains demand. Everything becomes urgent. When everything is urgent, nothing is. Dispatchers make triage decisions. They hold one train to let another. They reroute to avoid congestion. They send trains into sidings. Each decision is rational locally. Together, they create systemic delay. Model's 3-hour slip was not an accident. It was a symptom. And while that schedule slipped, the front line did not pause. On the ground, the battle was being decided by pressure at specific points. The Allies in Normandy exploited terrain like machinery too. The hedgerows created compartments. Every field became a small fortress. Attacks were measured in meters. But the Allied advantage was not only tactics. It was if an Allied unit burned shells, new shells arrived. If a tank was disabled, another tank replaced it. If a road was crowded, engineers built another route. For the Germans, replacement was slower and less certain, especially under air attack. Model's operational goal was to hold not because the line was sacred, but because a coherent line simplifies logistics. A coherent line has predictable supply points, predictable radio nets, predictable artillery zones, predictable evacuation routes. A collapsing line produces uncertainty. Uncertainty increases traffic. Traffic increases exposure. Exposure increases losses. Losses increase collapse. That loop is what Model was trying to prevent. The reserve train, delayed, was the plug for a leak. At the same time, the leak widened. A battalion at the front might have reported armor sightings. Another might have reported fuel low. Another might have asked for artillery support that could not be delivered because guns were short of shells. Those messages moved through radios and wire. But communication is also a system. Wires get cut by shell fire. Radios are jammed by terrain. Batteries run down. Operators are exhausted. So information arriving to Model's headquarters was always late and incomplete. He was looking at a timetable and a map, trying to synchronize a machine with missing sensors. Now we reach the part of the story where the mechanism becomes clear. Imagine a reserve formation needing to arrive at a railhead at, roughly, 9 o'clock to move under cover toward the front. It arrives at 12 o'clock instead. That is 3 hours. Those 3 hours are not empty. They are daylight hours. The unit cannot simply drive forward at 12 o'clock like it could at 9 o'clock. The sky is more active. Allied aircraft cycles are in motion. Spotters have had time to report movement. Roads are already congested with retreating traffic and supply columns. So the unit either moves and risks being shredded, or it waits and arrives too late to matter. Now add the next constraint. Fuel. Trucks waiting burn fuel in idling and in short repositioning moves. Trucks moving in stop-and-go traffic burn fuel faster than in steady convoy motion. Trucks detouring around craters burn fuel. Trucks spreading out to avoid air attacks burn fuel. If fuel usage rises, fewer trucks can make repeated trips. That reduces the unit's speed of assembly at the front. Assembly speed is everything. A counterattack is not a unit goes forward. It is enough of the unit arrives together to matter. If parts arrive piecemeal, they get defeated in detail. Rail delay causes piecemeal arrival. Piecemeal arrival causes fragmented combat power. Fragmented combat power causes failure. And failure triggers retreat. Now we consider the front as a line of stress. When a sector starts to bend, other sectors must adjust. They may pull back to avoid being flanked. They may send reserves away from their own positions. They may fire more artillery to compensate. They may request more fuel, more ammunition, more engineers. All of those responses increase logistical demand at the exact moment the logistical system is failing. This is how collapse happens without a dramatic order. It happens like a belt snapping. Model's reputation was built on improvisation under pressure, but he was not a magician. Even he could not create throughput. He could only redistribute pain. He might have ordered a local withdrawal to shorten the line. He might have shifted anti-tank guns to likely corridors. He might have used field fortifications, mines, and obstacles to slow Allied armor. But without the reserve arriving on time, every action became reactive rather than shaping. And reactivity is expensive. It consumes ammunition fast. It consumes fuel faster. It consumes attention. It consumes morale. The 3-hour delay in this story is a symbol, not a fetish number. It represents a narrow window where a plan can still impose order on events. Miss the window, and events impose order on you. In the midsummer fighting in Normandy, German reserves were constantly being thrown in and then bled out because they could not concentrate faster than Allied pressure. The Allies had their own bottlenecks, but they had depth. Their air power could cover, their engineering units could open routes. Their supply system was massive and adaptive. Germany's system was smaller, brittle, and under constant attack. So Model's reliance on a perfect timetable was not foolish. It was the only lever he had left. But it was also the lever the enemy had been training to break. We often picture generals as choosing between boldness and caution. In reality, by 1944, they were choosing between failure modes. A rail-based plan fails slowly at first, then suddenly, because it creates dependency on a sequence. If the sequence is interrupted, the plan does not degrade gracefully. It falls. Model likely realized the danger as reports came in. Perhaps the train was rerouted, perhaps a junction had been hit. Perhaps the dispatch office reported congestion. Perhaps the locomotives were held in a siding to avoid air attack. To a staff officer, that sounds manageable. A delay, a revision, a new estimated time. To a front commander, it is a lost opportunity because combat windows are not measured by train timetables. The Allies did not need to know the German schedule to exploit its absence. They only needed to push hard enough that the Germans could not regain coherence. And the Germans under Model were fighting to keep coherence. Now watch the failure unfold as process. First, the reserve arrives late. That forces a rushed offload. Men jump down from flat cars. Vehicles are started quickly, often without careful checks. That increases breakdown rates. Second, the convoy moves. Drivers keep larger spacing to reduce air vulnerability. Larger spacing lengthens the column. A longer column takes more time to pass bottlenecks like villages and bridges. Third, bottlenecks occur. A bridge is damaged. A road is cratered. A civilian cart blocks a lane. A damaged vehicle sits across the road. Every stop increases exposure time. Fourth, Allied aircraft exploit the congestion. They do not need to destroy the whole column. They need to create stoppage. A single burning truck can immobilize an entire line behind it. Fifth, the reserve arrives in fragments. The leading elements meet the front without support. They fight, burn ammunition. The trailing elements arrive to find the situation changed. They are thrown in without a full plan. That wastes their remaining strength. Sixth, the front line adjusts backward to avoid encirclement. That retreat requires more transport. More transport requires more fuel. More fuel requires more rail deliveries, which are now even harder because railheads have moved, roads are crowded, and air attack continues. The system enters a downward spiral. This is the point where courage is still present, but it is no longer decisive. A tank crew can hold a crossroads for hours. An infantry platoon can fight in a hedgerow until night. An engineer team can rebuild a bridge under shell fire. But these actions, the collapse is macro. It is the sum of small failures in timing and movement multiplied across a network, and the network is what Model was counting on. He was a commander trained to treat war like an equation. Inputs produce output. If you concentrate faster, you strike harder. If you retreat in order, you preserve units. If you maintain supply, you keep options. The Allies attacked the math. They attacked the ability to concentrate. They attacked the ability to retreat in order. They attacked the supply. They attacked the timetable. In the popular imagination, a front collapses because men panic. But, more often, collapse begins because the procedures that keep men effective break down. A battalion without ammunition cannot hold, no matter its spirit. A regiment without fuel cannot move, no matter its discipline. A division without communications cannot coordinate, no matter its leadership. A corps without reserves cannot respond, no matter its doctrine. When Model's rail plan slipped by hours, it did not merely delay reinforcements. It delayed a whole set of interlocking procedures. The Germans relied on tight staff work, orders, maps, and timings. Even the best staff work cannot outrun broken infrastructure. And infrastructure in 1944 was a battlefield. Rail lines were not neutral pipes, they were contested arteries. Every bridge was a choke point. Every marshalling yard was a target. Every locomotive was a scarce asset. It is easy to say, just use trucks. But trucks in 1944 Germany were not a limitless alternative. They were a fragile, fuel-hungry patch. Rail gave Germany leverage. Without it, their operational mobility. Now we come to the industrial verdict. Model trusted the timetable because he had to. The paper represented order in a world where order was dying. But paper can lie by omission. A timetable does not show air superiority. It does not show bomb craters. It does not show a marshalling yard choked with wrecked cars. It does not show exhausted repair crews working by lantern light. It does not show a dispatcher making impossible priority choices. It does not show that 3 hours in daylight can equal a lost sector. In mechanized war, timing is not a detail, it is the weapon. And the weapon is often held by the side that controls. Model story is not about incompetence. It is about constraint. The German army in France was being defeated by a system that could apply pressure everywhere, all the time. Air power, engineering capacity, and supply depth. The individuals on the German side could still fight hard. Many did. The individuals on the Allied side could still die, and many did. But the outcome was increasingly determined by who could keep their machines synchronized. In that sense, the rail timetable was a symbol of an older kind of war. A war where the schedule could still be enforced. By 1944, the schedule was being written by the enemy. The lesson is sharp and uncomfortable. If your plan depends on perfect timing, it is already fragile. If your plan depends on infrastructure you do not control, it is already compromised. And if your enemy can disrupt your movement faster than you can repair it, courage becomes an expense, not a solution. That is what 3 hours can do. It can turn a reserve into a late arrival into a fragmented counterattack, a fragmented counterattack into a retreat, and a retreat into a front that no longer exists as a line. If you want more episodes where we dissect war as a machine, like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments, which hidden variables should we cover next, and where are you watching from?